It was supposed to be a celebratory dinner. My wife Serena had just made partner at Lockridge and Crane, the high-powered corporate law firm she worshipped like a religion. She'd worked late nights, skipped vacations, and missed birthdays just to get that fancy corner office. Tonight was her victory lap, and she'd invited her whole family to bask in the glow. The place was one of those modern steakhouses downtown where the wine list was longer than the menu, and everyone looked like they belonged in a glossy magazine. Serena had picked the table near the big window, the one with a view of the skyline, her skyline, and she was already holding court by the time I arrived. Her father, Raymond, was there, his gray hair perfectly parted and his navy blazer sharp as ever. He'd been a senator before retiring to a boardroom and a second marriage. Next to him, her mother Francine swirled her wine like it held the answers to the universe. She'd always been polite, but there was a glassy quality to her kindness, like she was performing even when no one was watching. Camille, Serena's younger sister, had flown in from LA just to be here. She was the free spirit, the yoga instructor with 1 million Instagram followers and a wardrobe that looked stolen from a Coachella ad. Serena's smile was electric as she made her toast. "I just made partner," she beamed, raising her glass. "While my husband is just a plumber." Everyone laughed. Even Camille, who'd never worked a day in her life, let out this high-pitched giggle that made my stomach clench. I looked at Serena, but she didn't see me. She saw the version of me she'd crafted, the simple husband with the blue-collar job that gave her story texture. She loved to tell people I was a plumber, like it made her success more impressive by comparison. I forced a smile, but it felt brittle. I clinked my glass with hers and took a sip of water, letting the burn of disappointment settle into my chest. Serena had always loved the narrative. "Micah, the guy who fixes pipes," she'd say at parties, her tone dripping with affectionate condescension. I'd laugh it off because it was easier than explaining the truth. I didn't mind the work boots or the wrench in my trunk. I'd always believed there was dignity in every job, but I also knew the world didn't see it that way. The waiter came around with a tray of appetizers. I reached for a shrimp skewer, but my appetite had evaporated. I was too busy watching Serena's eyes shine in the candlelight as she accepted her father's compliments and her mother's praise. "You've always been the smart one," Francine said, her smile stretching tight as a drum. "We knew you'd outgrow all this." She didn't look at me when she said it. I wondered if Serena had told her about the times I'd picked up the slack when she was too exhausted to cook or the nights I'd rubbed her feet after she'd worked 12-hour days. Probably not. That wasn't part of the story. Camille scrolled her phone, showing Serena something that made them both laugh. I wanted to ask what it was, but I learned that sometimes it was better to let them have their bubble. Then Francine's phone buzzed. She picked it up, eyes narrowing, then widening. The blood drained from her face. "Serena," she said, her voice tight. "Why is your husband's company valued at $1 billion in the Wall Street Journal?" The room went silent. Even the clinking of silverware stopped. I felt every eye on me, even Serena's, wide and blinking. "What's she talking about?" Serena demanded, her tone sharp, like I'd betrayed some unspoken contract. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment sink in. The truth had been hidden in plain sight, like a secret I'd tucked into the pocket of my work jeans. Francine thrust her phone across the table. The headline was there in bold print. "Ironclad Systems' estimated valuation hits $1 billion amid acquisition rumors." My name wasn't in the headline, but my company's name was. I met Serena's stare, her glass still in midair, her mouth slightly open. "Micah," she said, her voice trembling now. "Is this true?" I nodded once. "Yeah, Ironclad is mine." A flicker of realization crossed her face. The timeline, the secrecy, the long hours I'd spent at the shop. She tried to find words, but I beat her to it. "But I'm just a plumber, remember?" Her glass clinked against the table as she set it down too hard. The room's air turned electric. Camille's phone was still glowing, a half-written caption abandoned. Raymond's face had gone the color of damp concrete. I could see his mind spinning with calculations and regrets. Francine's wineglass trembled in her hand. It was the first time in years I felt like the room was seeing me, the real me. Not the convenient story they'd written about me. Not the footnote to Serena's success. I was the guy who'd quietly built something while they'd been busy polishing their image of themselves. I didn't say another word. I just picked up my water glass and took a slow sip, letting the tension coil tighter around the table. Serena's eyes searched mine for something she didn't recognize. And in that moment, I saw the cracks in her confidence. The dinner had been hers. The celebration had been hers. But the truth was mine, and I'd let it sit there, waiting for the right time to shine. Maybe it wasn't polite. Maybe it wasn't fair. But it was real. And I'd learned long ago that real was better than any story. They didn't know I owned Ironclad Systems, a private B2B infrastructure company that developed AI pipeline diagnostics for municipal and industrial use. My name isn't public. I let my CTO handle all the press. Everyone just assumed I was the guy who fixes pipes, and that's exactly how I wanted it. Even Serena, who once claimed she loved every part of me, the ambition, the intellect, the stubborn streak, had no clue. She built her world on status and titles. Partner at Lockridge and Crane. That was her new identity. Me? I liked my world quieter. I liked the idea that my work was respected in ways that didn't need a title or a plaque on the wall. Ironclad Systems had grown out of a series of late nights at the local library while I was finishing my master's in fluid engineering. I'd been fascinated by the city's aging pipeline systems and the colossal waste that came from leaks, burst mains, and outdated detection methods. Most municipalities were bleeding money fixing problems after they'd already caused millions in damage. I saw a way to change that, so I started coding, sketching, dreaming. I built a prototype diagnostic tool that used AI and predictive analytics to flag weaknesses in pipe systems before they turned into emergencies. It wasn't glamorous, but it saved cities millions. By the time I had my first real contract, a small but forward-thinking water district in Pennsylvania, Serena had just started her first year at Lockridge and Crane. She was exhausted and overwhelmed, so I didn't burden her with the details of what I was building. I'd come home with dirt under my nails and a grin on my face, but she'd be buried in case files, so I'd just kiss her forehead and let her sleep. I kept going, slowly adding engineers and coders to the team. We grew by word of mouth, by delivering results that couldn't be denied. Our technology predicted 83% of urban pipe failures before they happened. The city of Philadelphia alone saved $12 million in 6 months because of Ironclad. But every time we visited her parents, I was the butt of polite jokes about fixing leaks and unclogging drains. Serena didn't correct them. At first, it amused me. I'd sip my drink, smile, and nod along. It was a kind of social camouflage. No one ever asked the plumber to donate to a cause or sit on a board or sponsor a gala. I could observe without being pulled into the endless game of appearances. And I was genuinely curious how people would treat me when they thought I had no power or influence. Spoiler alert, they failed the test. Her father, Raymond, loved to hold court about the stock market, about the political climate, about all the ways the world could be fixed if everyone would just listen to him. He'd look at me like I was the hired help, a nod to the American dream. Serena's blue-collar husband. He'd talk at me, not to me. Her mother, Francine, was more subtle. She'd ask about my day in a tone that suggested she already knew it was uninteresting. Camille. Well, Camille was usually too busy curating her next Instagram post to even notice I was in the room. Serena would pat my knee under the table, a silent apology, but it always felt like a warning. Don't ruin the image. Don't correct the story. Don't step out of place. So I didn't. I let them believe I was the plumber who'd lucked out and married up. Meanwhile, I met with my CTO and CFO in small conference rooms and ironed out licensing deals with water authorities that put 7-figure deposits into our account overnight. I built a company that employed brilliant engineers, coders, and field techs, people who'd grown up thinking their ideas didn't matter. I gave them purpose. And I gave them anonymity too, because Ironclad didn't need a flashy founder to get results. I was content to let the technology speak for itself. But sometimes, when I'd drive home from the lab at 2 in the morning, a warm cup of gas station coffee in the console, I'd think about Serena and how she'd stopped asking about my work altogether. Early on, she'd been curious. She'd ask questions about the technology, the goals, the big picture. But somewhere along the way, the answers stopped matching. She got so caught up in her own climb that she missed the fact I was building something too, something bigger than a corner office or a brass nameplate. I didn't mind, at least not at first. I'd watch her talk about becoming partner like it was the holy grail, and I'd smile and tell her she deserved it. Because she did. She worked hard, sacrificed weekends, turned herself inside out for that firm. But I was working too, just in a different way. And somewhere along the line, it stopped being we and started being her and the plumber. She didn't know I'd already signed deals with major cities across the East Coast. She didn't know we'd been approached by Praxium Holdings about a potential acquisition that would catapult Ironclad's value into the billions. She didn't know that the guy she'd been calling the guy who fixes pipes was on track to become one of the most quietly powerful players in the infrastructure sector. I never corrected her, partly because I wanted to see who she'd become when the money wasn't in front of her, and partly because I wanted to know how it felt to have the truth in my pocket like a secret weapon, not to hurt her, but to remind myself that I hadn't needed her approval to get here. When the Wall Street Journal article dropped, my CFO forwarded it with a one-line email. Looks like the cat's out of the bag. I stared at the headline, Ironclad Systems, the billion-dollar underground giant, and felt the weight of every family dinner where I'd played the part. I'd let them all think I was small so they could feel big. I'd let Serena build her story on top of me, brick by brick. And now, every one of those bricks had become part of the empire they'd never seen coming. The plumber. Just a plumber. I smiled. When I met Serena, I was in my final year of grad school, grinding out a master's in fluid engineering while juggling a half-dozen odd jobs to keep the lights on. I did plumbing work on the side, installing water heaters, unclogging drains, and fixing the kind of stuff no one wanted to talk about at dinner parties. I wasn't ashamed of it. I actually liked the problem-solving, the tangible sense of fixing something that others thought was broken. It was honest work, and it paid the bills while I scribbled equations and built prototypes late into the night. Serena was a second-year associate at Lockridge and Crane then, with a smile that could break glass and an ambition that radiated from her like heat off asphalt. She'd come into the cafe where I was working part-time, a stack of legal pads under her arm, too preoccupied with case files to notice the coffee stains on my jeans. I'd liked that about her, the single-minded focus, the way she could dissect a contract like it was a puzzle she was determined to solve. She looked at me over her laptop, eyebrows arched. "What are you reading?" she'd asked, pointing to the engineering textbook next to my half-eaten bagel. That was how it started. She liked my curiosity. I liked her fire. I thought she saw the real me, the one who stayed up all night designing fluid dynamics models, the one who wanted to make cities better, safer, smarter. And at first, she did. We'd meet for quick dinners between shifts, talk about our dreams and the future. She said she liked my ambition, my drive. "You're going places," she'd say, tracing a finger along my jawline, her eyes bright with promise. "We'll be unstoppable together." But somewhere along the way, that narrative shifted. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment, but I remember it felt like a slow fade, like watching the sunset in reverse. Maybe it was the night she brought me to the Lockridge and Crane holiday party and introduced me as Micah, he's a plumber. The way she said it, like it was a punchline, a sweet little anecdote to show she wasn't shallow, that she could love someone who didn't wear a tie to work. I'd smiled, of course. I'd played along. I told myself it didn't matter because I knew what I was building behind the scenes. But every time she repeated that joke, at dinners, at parties, in casual conversation, I felt a piece of me slip away. Like I'd become the role she needed me to play in the story she was telling herself. Serena, the brilliant corporate lawyer, with a simple, dependable husband who was easy to manage. "You're so simple. So dependable," she'd said one night, her head resting on my shoulder after a long day. Like it was a compliment. Like it was a feature. I'd laughed, but it stuck with me. Simple. Dependable. Like a Labrador retriever. Like I'd been housebroken. Like she'd picked me out of a lineup of options because I'd never strayed too far from her shadow. I used to laugh it off because I thought we were stronger than that. I thought she was just tired or stressed, or that the demands of her job had turned her sharper than she meant to be. But the jokes stopped being funny. They became the soundtrack of our marriage. Serena, the overachiever. Micah, the plumber who was easy to overlook. At first, I tried to remind her who I was. I'd mention a new project at work or drop hints about the contracts I was negotiating. But she'd glaze over, her eyes darting back to her phone, to emails from partners and messages from clients. She was too busy winning, and I was too busy letting her. I could have pushed back. I could have corrected her. But part of me wanted to see how far she'd go. I wanted to know if she'd ever look past the image she'd crafted, the convenient stories she'd wrapped around me like a comfortable coat. I wanted to know if she'd ever ask, "Micah, what are you building?" But she never did. She liked the version of me that made her look bigger by comparison. She liked the story where she was the success, and I was the background. Sometimes I'd watch her get ready for work in the morning, all crisp lines and perfect hair, and I'd wonder if she even remembered the guy she met in that cafe, the one with the coffee-stained jeans and the spark in his eye. The guy who wanted to change the world, one pipeline at a time. I never stopped working. While she posted office selfies with espresso cups and captions like Monday motivation, I was in the lab with my team, refining AI models that could predict pipe failures down to the street corner. While she was presenting to partners, I was negotiating with city councils and utility boards, signing deals that would change the way cities manage their infrastructure. I was building something real, something that would outlast 1,000 office promotions and 1,000,000 LinkedIn posts. But at the dinner table, at family parties, at the bar with her colleagues, I was just the plumber. And she never corrected them. She never gave me the benefit of the doubt. She never asked what was behind the quiet smile, the tired eyes. She didn't see the hours I put in after midnight, the sacrifices I made, the team I led. To her, I was simple, dependable, forgettable. It's funny how the people who claim to love you can be so blind. Or maybe it's not blindness at all. Maybe it's willful ignorance, a way to keep the story neat and clean, the hierarchy intact. Serena needed that, and I let her have it. Because I thought it didn't matter. Because I thought she'd remember who I really was when it counted. Turns out I was wrong. While she posted office selfies with espresso in hand, I quietly built Ironclad with a small team of engineers and coders who believed in the vision even before the world started paying attention. I started with a tiny space, a one-room office with a shared bathroom and a flickering fluorescent light that made it look like the backdrop of a crime scene. But it was mine, and in those four walls, we built something the world didn't see coming. We were the underdogs, working through nights lit by vending machine glow and the hum of servers, drinking too much bad coffee and taking pride in our weird little AI models. We refined our diagnostics algorithm again and again until it was better than any competitors. Our software could predict up to 83% of urban pipe failures before they even happened. Imagine that, cities saving millions on repairs and water loss. But no one at Serena's dinner tables asked me about that. No one wanted to know about the hours I spent pitching our tech to local water authorities, or the phone calls to skeptical engineers who'd rather replace a pipe than listen to a guy in jeans talk about artificial intelligence. They just saw Serena's success, the partner's salary, the high heels that clicked with authority, and then they'd glance at me like I'd tagged along, some charity project she'd picked up at the shelter. At those dinners, Serena's father would go on about the stock market, how it was a real man's game, while her mother would sip her third glass of wine and talk about their family's legacy and politics. Like it was an inheritance she couldn't bear to share with someone who worked with his hands. Camille would post selfies, filtered to death, captioned, "Family time with the power couple," like I was some trophy she borrowed for the evening. And every time, Serena would smile and pat my knee under the table, as if that was all it took to keep me content. I started to see it, the way she liked the contrast. She was the high-powered attorney. I was the plumber. It gave her an edge at those dinner parties, made her look like the benevolent one, the star who didn't need to marry her equal because she was that good. But every day, while she curated her brand and worked those late hours, I was in meetings that could change the face of a city's infrastructure. I had contracts with the Department of Water Management and several high-level government agencies. We were revolutionizing how cities managed aging pipes. In Philadelphia, our tech had saved the city $12 million in 6 months. $12 million. That was real money, real impact. And yet, at her parents' house, I was the guy who fixed drains. I remember one night vividly. Her father, leaning back in his chair with a cigar in hand, looked at me and said, "So Micah, when are you going to get serious about your career? Serena's carrying the weight, you know." Serena laughed lightly, not even bothering to defend me. "Dad," she'd said, "Mike is fine. He likes what he does." She said it like I was a child who'd decided finger painting was a career choice. I felt the smile freeze on my face. That was the moment I realized that in their eyes, and maybe even in Serena's, I wasn't building anything. I was just a placeholder, a warm body at the dinner table. I played along because I wanted to see how long it would take before anyone noticed the cracks in their narrative. Spoiler alert, no one did. My team at Ironclad worked in silence, refining and scaling. We put up record numbers and started winning awards, ones with little logos that would have impressed Serena's father if he'd ever cared to ask. But I didn't share the articles. I didn't bring them home. I didn't brag. Because I was watching how everyone treated the man they thought I was. The man who'd married up. The man who should be grateful to be at the table. It's funny how people talk about wanting authenticity, but they can't handle it when it shows up uninvited. I think that's why I kept my success a secret, not just from Serena, but from everyone. I wanted to see who loved me when there was nothing to gain. Spoiler alert, not many did. And every time I sat at that dinner table, a polite smile on my face, nodding along to talk of stock options and vacation homes, I wondered what would happen when the truth came out. When the headlines splashed across their screens and the plumber was suddenly worth more than all their fancy law degrees combined. I wondered how they'd react when the guy they'd pitted turned out to be the one holding the winning hand. I wondered if Serena would still smile the same way when she realized the person she'd married wasn't the narrative she'd sold to her friends. So I sat there, listening to her father's lectures on politics, her mother's bragging, Camille's shallow jokes. I let them talk about my little jobs while I signed multi-million-dollar contracts and negotiated government deals. And in those moments, I learned more than I ever did in any engineering class. People will believe whatever story you hand them, especially if it makes them feel bigger. It was the underestimation principle. Let them underestimate you. Let them think you're small. Let them laugh. Because when the truth comes out, their surprise is the sweetest victory. So I sipped my water. I let them laugh. And I smiled, because I knew the day was coming when the plumber would be the one they all wanted to meet. Serena started referring to me as utility class in front of her colleagues, and the first time she said it, I thought I'd misheard. We were at a rooftop cocktail event, one of those slick affairs where everyone wore tailored suits and sipped martinis they barely drank. The skyline stretched behind us, all glass and steel, and I was thinking about the latest contract Ironclad had signed with the city of Boston, another $1 million deal that would take our pipeline diagnostic tech national. I planned to share that with Serena that night, maybe let her know just how far her plumber had come. But then she introduced me to her colleague Henry as utility class, and she didn't even blink. He's the utility class, she said with a quick laugh. Keeps things running. Henry smirked, and I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I swallowed it down and shook his hand. Utility class. Like I was a second-tier citizen in her world of polished boardrooms and manicured office plants. She said it lightly, like it was a compliment, like I was part of the system that made her high-powered life function. But I knew the subtext. I'd seen it enough times in her eyes when she scrolled through Instagram, liking photos of the real winners while ignoring my latest team award. I'd felt it at family dinners when her father bragged about her wins and forgot I was even in the room. The utility class, someone who was there to support, not to lead. I tried to brush it off, telling myself it was just a joke. But the barbs started stacking up. She'd text me things like, "Can you swing by the dry cleaner on your way home?" Utility class hero. Like I was her assistant. Like I didn't have my own empire to run. The final straw came when she left me off the invitation to her firm's retreat in Aspen. We'd been planning to spend a weekend together, a rare chance to reconnect. I'd already rearranged meetings, rescheduled conference calls, told my CTO I'd be offline. But 3 days before the trip, she looked at me across the dinner table and said, "I don't think you'll really fit in there, Micah. It's just lawyers, white shoe crowd. You'd be bored." She said it with that same glossy smile, the one that meant she'd already made the decision and was just giving me the courtesy of a heads up. I wanted to ask her if she'd ever been bored at my investor dinners, or the time she sat through my keynote at the water management conference, pretending to care. But the words died in my throat. I just nodded and said, "Sure. Enjoy yourself." Because I'd learned the hard way that in her world, I was background, an accessory, a neat addition to her narrative about balancing success and humility, the husband who didn't mind being underestimated. I went back to work, back to Ironclad, where my team and I were finalizing a breakthrough update that would revolutionize the way cities monitored their pipelines. We'd landed a contract with the Department of Water Management, a federal pilot program that would put our software into over 100 cities. It was the kind of deal that would make headlines, the kind that would put Ironclad on the map as an industry leader. But at home, I was the guy who'd hold Serena's coat at cocktail parties, the man she'd leave off the guest list when things got exclusive. One night, she came home late, her hair tousled from the wind, her eyes bright with adrenaline. "The retreat was amazing," she said, dropping her purse on the counter. "I wish you'd been there." I wanted to ask her why she hadn't fought for me to come, why she'd let me be the one left out while she networked and charmed. But I didn't. I just smiled and asked how it went, and she launched into a story about the partners' dinner, about how everyone had laughed at her jokes and praised her presentation. I stood there, nodding, thinking about the deals I'd signed while she'd been gone. thinking about how no one at that dinner had any idea who I really was. Maybe that's what finally broke me, realizing she didn't see me anymore, didn't want to. That she'd built a version of me she could carry around like a good luck charm, safe and predictable and small. That she'd started to believe her own PR. That night, after she went to bed, I pulled up the email from my CFO. Wall Street Journal was dropping a piece on Ironclad's latest valuation, $1 billion, with acquisition rumors swirling. I didn't feel pride. I didn't feel triumph. I just felt tired. Tired of being utility class. Tired of being background. Tired of waiting for someone else to see what I'd built. I could have told Serena then, could have shown her the article, could have made her look at me for the first time in months. But I didn't. I wanted to see what would happen if I stayed silent just a little longer. If she'd notice. Spoiler alert, she didn't. The next morning, she kissed me on the cheek and grabbed her briefcase. "Have a good day, Micah," she said, her voice bright and oblivious. "Don't forget to pick up the dry cleaning." I watched her walk out the door, her heels clicking like gunshots in the hallway. I made a cup of coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the email again. $1 billion valuation. My name in the fine print. The plumber she'd left off the guest list. I smiled to myself and thought, they'll all find out soon enough. And when they do, I'll be the one holding the invitation they all wanted. I had no plan for revenge. I had no plan at all. I was just tired. Tired of the looks, the dismissals, the polite laughter that rang in my ears every time Serena's colleagues or her family called me the plumber. It was easier that way, I told myself. Less confrontation. Less drama. Let them think they'd mapped me out. Let them keep building their house of illusions. But deep down, I was waiting for the moment when the truth would punch through the pretense like a hammer through glass. That moment came on a Thursday morning. My CFO forwarded an email flagged, high priority. A journalist from the Wall Street Journal had done a deep dive on Ironclad's latest deal with Praxium Holdings. The reporter had uncovered our pipeline diagnostic text track record, the 83% reduction in catastrophic failures, the $12 million saved in Philadelphia, the federal contracts pending approval. She'd pieced together the valuation numbers from investor calls, linked them to public records, and come up with a figure that made my stomach clench. Potential acquisition rumors. Ironclad Systems valued at over $1 billion. It was all there, laid out in black and white, with enough detail to light up every boardroom in the city. I leaned back in my chair and let the weight of it settle. For years, I'd built this company in the dark, deflecting questions, letting Serena's world believe I was just another guy with a wrench and a work van. Now the floodlights were about to hit, and I didn't know how I felt about that. I didn't panic. I didn't gloat. I didn't even tell my team there'd be time for that later. Instead, I did the one thing I hadn't done in months. I RSVP'd, yes, to Serena's family dinner on Saturday night. Serena had planned it weeks ago, a celebration of her promotion. Her mother had probably already ordered enough wine to drown a small village, and her father would have a toast ready, dripping with the kind of pride that always forgot to mention me. Camille would be there too, no doubt with a new set of Instagram filters ready to document every moment of Serena's ascent. I wondered what they'd all say when the Wall Street Journal hit the breakfast table that morning. Would they be proud? Ashamed? Embarrassed that they hadn't known the truth? Friday came, and the article dropped. Ironclad Systems, the billion-dollar plumber. I had to hand it to the journalist. She'd nailed the hook. It was catchy, easy to share. A plumber-turned-tech mogul who'd quietly built an empire while no one was looking. I could already see the headlines spinning across LinkedIn, the whispers at Serena's office. I'd spent so long hiding in plain sight that it felt almost surreal to see my name in print, Michael Landry, founder and CEO. I thought about calling Serena, thought about warning her. But then I remembered all the times she'd called me utility class and left me off her guest lists. I remembered the retreat in Aspen, the cocktail parties, the polite laughter, the tiny cuts that had piled up into a mountain. I decided she could read it the way everyone else would. Saturday night came, and I dressed like I always did. No suit, no tie, just jeans and a button-down shirt. The same Micah I'd always been, the one they dismissed. I wanted them to see him when the truth came out. I wanted them to realize that the man they'd underestimated was the same one who'd built something bigger than all their dinners and promotions combined. The house smelled like garlic and wine when I walked in. Serena's mother was in the kitchen, barking orders at the caterer. Her father was already at the head of the table, glass of scotch in hand. his voice filling the room with the kind of practiced authority that only politicians have. Camille was on the couch, phone in hand, her eyes glued to the screen. Serena greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek. "Hey, Han. Thanks for coming." Her eyes were bright, her smile perfect. She had no idea. Dinner started like it always did. Her father gave a speech about Serena's achievements, about how proud they all were to have a daughter who'd made partner at Lockridge and Crane. Camille snapped photos. Francine dabbed her eyes with a cloth napkin. The room was full of laughter and clinking glasses, the sound of a family celebrating its star. Then Serena stood up, glass in hand. "I just wanted to say how grateful I am for all of you," she said, her voice steady, the lawyer in her polished to perfection. "It's been a long road, but I couldn't have done it without my family. And Micah," she paused, giving me that sweet, rehearsed smile. "You've always been my rock." The room applauded. I forced a smile. That's when Francine's phone buzzed. She picked it up, I scanning the screen. Her smile faltered. "Serena," she said, her voice trembling just a little, "why is your husband's company valued at $1 billion in the Wall Street Journal?" The room went silent. Even the caterer stopped moving. All eyes turned to me. Serena's face froze. "Micah," she asked, her voice cracking. "Is that true?" I nodded slowly. "Yeah. Ironclad is mine." Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I looked at her father. His glass hung in midair, forgotten. Camille's phone was now aimed at me, recording. I wondered what caption she'd use this time. I stood up, my chair scraping the floor. "But I'm just a plumber," I said, letting the words sink in. "Remember?" No one laughed. No one moved. For the first time in years, I felt seen. Not as the guy with the wrench, not as Serena's husband, but as the man who'd built something from nothing. The man they'd underestimated. And in that silence, I realized I didn't need revenge. The truth was enough. The dining room felt like a stage, every eye on me, every breath held as if the world had stopped spinning just to watch me stand there. Serena's father was the first to move, his hand trembling slightly as he set down his glass. "Micah, is this some kind of joke?" he asked, his voice brittle, like he was trying to convince himself that I couldn't possibly have outgrown his neatly drawn lines. I held his gaze, feeling years of quiet patience harden into something unbreakable. "No joke," I said, my voice steady. "Ironclad is mine. I built it. The contracts, the technology, the valuation, they're all real." Serena's lips moved like she was trying to find the right words, but nothing came out. Her eyes darted between me and the phone in Francine's hand, the one displaying the Wall Street Journal article that had shattered the story she'd told herself about me. I wondered how many times she'd repeated that story at cocktail parties and office events. Micah the plumber, the simple, dependable husband who never demanded too much attention. I wondered if she realized how fragile that story really was. I could feel the room shift, like tectonic plates grinding under the surface, the foundations of their assumptions starting to crack. Camille's phone was still pointed at me, her thumb hovering as if she couldn't decide whether to keep recording or put the damn thing down. I met her gaze and gave her a nod. Let her record. Let the world see what they'd missed. Serena's father leaned forward, his politician's smile gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Why didn't you say anything?" he asked, his tone somewhere between disbelief and accusation. I shrugged. "I didn't think it mattered to you," I said. Every time I sat at this table, it was about Serena, about her achievements, her promotions. No one asked what I was building. No one cared. His mouth opened, then closed. Francine set her wineglass down with a soft clink that sounded like a confession. "We didn't know," she whispered, her voice small, almost childlike. "That's the point," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "You didn't want to know. You liked the version of me that fit your story. The plumber. The guy who didn't make waves." Serena's hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Micah," she started, her voice shaking. "Why didn't you tell me? We're a team. We're supposed to share these things." I almost laughed, but it came out as a sigh. "A team," I repeated, my tone gentle but edged with the truth. "Like when you left me off the Aspen retreat. Like when you told your colleagues I was utility class." Her face paled, her mouth trembling. "Micah, but I cut her off. "Serena, you didn't want a partner. You wanted a supporting character in the story of your success. I gave you that. I let you have your story because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer." The room was silent. Camille's phone was trembling now. I wondered if she was finally seeing her sister for who she really was. Serena's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know," she whispered. I believed her, And that was the saddest part. She hadn't known because she hadn't wanted to. Her father cleared his throat. "Well, Micah," he said, forcing a smile that looked like it hurt. "Now that we know the truth, perhaps we can work together. There's plenty of opportunities, political partnerships, business deals." I shook my head. "That's not why I'm here," I said. "I didn't come to make a deal. I came because I was tired of pretending." Francine reached across the table, her manicured hand trembling as she tried to bridge the gap. "We always believed in you, Micah," she said, her voice syrupy. "Your family." Family. The word tasted bitter. I looked at Serena, her tears rolling down her cheeks, her carefully crafted world crumbling around her. "Micah, please," she said, her voice a plea now. "Don't do this here. We can talk about it later." But I was done with later. I stood, pushing my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood like a final note. "No," I said. "We're talking about it now. Because for years, I let you define who I was to everyone you cared about. I let you use me as a prop in your story. I let you laugh at me. And I stayed silent because I wanted to believe that the woman I loved would see past the surface. But you didn't." Her sobs were quiet now, the kind that shake your whole body. I wondered if she was crying for me or for herself. I turned to the rest of the table, to Francine and Raymond and Camille. "You all got the version of me you deserved," I said, my voice low but unwavering. "But the truth was always there if you'd bothered to look." I took one last look at Serena, the woman I'd loved, the woman who'd taught me how small people could be. "I'm leaving now," I said. "Enjoy your dinner." And with that, I walked out of the dining room, leaving behind the applause that never came, the congratulations that never reached my ears. I felt lighter than I had in years. Because finally, they knew. And I didn't need to be their plumber anymore. Questions exploded from every corner of the room. Raymond's voice boomed with disbelief as he demanded, "You built that? How? Why didn't you say anything?" Francine's eyes were wide, darting between her husband and me as if I'd grown two heads and was about to sprout a third. Camille had stopped recording, her phone now resting in her trembling hands, her Instagram feed momentarily forgotten. And Serena just sat there, frozen, like she was trying to peace talk. I stood by the dining room door, my hands resting on the back of the chair I'd abandoned moments earlier. "Yeah," I said, my voice calm. "I built it." Ironclad started as an idea scribbled on a napkin in a diner during my last year of grad school. I saw a problem no one was fixing: aging water infrastructure, billions of gallons of water lost every year, and I decided to do something about it. Raymond's jaw clenched, his politician's mask slipping. He caught himself, but the word he'd almost used hung between us. "Plumber." What?" I asked, my voice steady. "A plumber." I let the words settle like dust in the silence. "Yeah, I did plumbing work. I still do sometimes. I like the honesty in it, fixing things that are broken. But Ironclad? That's more than pipes. It's predictive analytics, AI, technology that can save cities millions and prevent disasters. It's engineers, coders, field experts. It's the future. And it's mine." Serena's lips parted, but her voice came out as a whisper. "Micah, why didn't you tell me? Why keep it a secret?" I met her eyes, the same eyes that had once looked at me like I was the answer to every question she'd never asked. "Because I wanted to know who loved me for me," I said. "Not for a billion-dollar company. Not for headlines. Just for who I was when I walked through the door at the end of a long day." I swallowed, feeling the ache that had been building for years. Spoiler alert, you all failed the test. Her face crumpled, tears welling up, but I didn't let myself waver. I turned to Raymond, who was still sputtering, trying to reconcile the man he'd dismissed with the man who now owned a company bigger than any of his political ventures. "You never asked me what I did," I said, my tone flat. "You asked how my day was, like you already knew the answer was unimportant." His mouth opened, but no words came. I turned to Francine. "You treated me like a curiosity, a hobby, a story to tell at brunch with your friends. But you never asked why I kept going back to the lab after midnight, why I spent weekends in meetings instead of on the golf course." Francine's hand shook, the wine glass trembling as if the truth might spill over the rim. "Micah, we didn't know," she whispered, her voice small. "We thought." "You thought I was simple," I said, my voice sharpening. "You thought I was the sidekick to Serena's story. But that's the thing about stories, they don't always go the way you expect." I felt the weight of the years pressing against my ribs, the dinners I'd sat through in silence, the jokes I'd laughed at to keep the peace. And I let it all go. Serena's voice cracked. Micah, please. I didn't mean. You didn't mean to see me, I said, cutting her off. You were too busy curating your life to realize there was more to me than the plumber who held your coat. I let the words hang, sharp and final. And that's on you. Raymond cleared his throat, his voice trembling with forced authority. Well, Micah, now that you've revealed yourself, perhaps we can discuss opportunities. There's a lot of potential here. I barked a laugh, cold and humorless. Opportunities? You think I need you? I shook my head. I built this without your approval, without your connections, without your money. I did it because I believed in the work. And I'm not interested in trading that in for a seat at your table. I've got my own table now. Camille, who had been silent through it all, finally spoke. So you really built all that? Her voice was small, like she was asking if the moon was real. I nodded once, and she looked down at her phone, her face pale. Maybe she was realizing that the likes and followers didn't mean much when real work was staring her in the face. I took a breath, feeling the room's weight press in. Look, I said, my tone softening, though not enough to let them off the hook. I didn't come here to rub your faces in it. I came because I was tired of hiding, tired of pretending, tired of being the man you thought I was instead of the man I am. I looked at Serena, her face streaked with tears, her shoulders slumped. I wanted to know who loved me before the billion. And I got my answer tonight. Her mouth opened, a sob caught in her throat. Micah. I shook my head. I can't be who you need me to be anymore. I can't be small so you can be big. I felt the knot in my chest loosen, the weight I'd carried for too long finally lifting. I hope someday you understand that. The room was silent. Even the caterer, who had been hovering near the kitchen door, had disappeared. It was just us, and the truth, and the cold realization that nothing would ever be the same. I stood a little taller, my spine straight, my heart steady. Ironclad is mine, and so is my future. I turned and walked toward the door, the echoes of my footsteps a rhythm of freedom. For the first time in years, I felt like I was walking toward something real. As I reached the hallway, I heard Serena's voice, small and broken. Micah, please. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, and turned just enough to meet her gaze. You always wanted the man who would stand behind you, I said. Turns out, I was always the man who would stand on his own. And then I walked out, leaving behind the questions they'd never thought to ask, the assumptions they'd never bothered to challenge. I didn't need their validation. I had my own, and that was more than enough. Serena tried damage control before I'd even left the driveway. My phone buzzed with her name, 3 times in a row, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. She'd already said enough with every polite laugh at my expense. Every invitation she'd left me off, every time she'd called me utility class and expected me to smile. Now she wanted to talk. Now she wanted to work through it. I could imagine her scrambling, crafting the perfect apology, her mind spinning a web of justifications and rationalizations. But I was done. The next morning, I woke up to an email from her. Subject line, we need to talk. I opened it, half expecting a full-on apology, but it was a carefully worded plea. Micah, I'm sorry for the way things played out last night. I was blindsided, and I didn't handle it well. I just wish you told me about Ironclad. We could have leveraged your success, used it to build our future together. Let's sit down and talk this through. We're a team. Love, Serena. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold in my hand. Leverage. That was the word that stuck in my throat. She saw my company, my blood and sweat, as a chess piece on her board. A tool for her image, for her brand. I thought of all the times I'd come home late from meetings, exhausted but wired with adrenaline from closing a deal, and she'd barely looked up from her phone. The times she'd called me utility class in front of her colleagues and never once corrected herself. That wasn't a team. That was a transaction. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened the envelope I'd been carrying around for weeks, a separation agreement I'd drawn up after the Aspen retreat, after I'd realized she saw me as an accessory instead of a partner. I'd never planned to use it. I'd kept hoping she'd see me, really see me, but she hadn't. That afternoon, I walked into the living room, and she was waiting, still in her tailored work dress, like she was about to deliver a closing argument. Micah, she started, her voice trembling with rehearsed emotion. We've been through so much together. Don't let this ruin us. I sat down, my heart steady. Serena, I said quietly, I love the woman I thought you were. I loved the nights you stayed up late studying for the bar, the way you'd light up when you talked about your first big case. But somewhere along the way, you stopped asking about me. You stopped caring about the man behind the work boots. Her lip quivered. That's not fair. It's perfectly fair, I cut in, my tone calm but unwavering. Every time you called me just a plumber. Every time you left me off the guest list. Every time you told your colleagues I was utility class. You told me exactly who you thought I was. She blinked, tears welling in her eyes. I was under pressure at my job. Your job didn't force you to look down on me, I said. That was your choice. I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. This is a separation agreement. I signed it already. You can review it with your fancy lawyer friends. Her face crumpled, and she reached for my hand. Micah, please, don't do this. We can fix it. We can be a team. I pulled my hand away gently. No, I said. You never wanted a team. You wanted a story. You wanted the narrative of the successful partner with the simple, dependable husband. That's not me anymore. Her tears came fast now, rolling down her cheeks. I didn't mean to, but you did, I said, standing up. You meant every word, every laugh, every time you left me in the background. I looked down at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like I had to prove myself. I was done proving anything to her. She tried again, her voice breaking. Please, Micah, don't throw this away. I shook my head. You threw it away every time you chose your image over your husband. I turned and walked toward the door, but paused, looking back at her one last time. You'll be fine, Serena. You've always known how to land on your feet. But I need to be somewhere I can breathe. She sobbed, but I didn't turn back. I walked out, the door closing behind me like the final page of a chapter I'd let drag on too long. Outside, the sun was just setting, painting the sky in colors that felt like freedom. I took a deep breath, the weight of years falling away from my shoulders. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt like the man I'd always wanted to be, unapologetic, whole, seen. The phone buzzed again in my pocket. I didn't even have to look at the screen to know it was her. I silenced it and kept walking. Because some things, once broken, can't be put back together. And I was done letting her hold the pieces. 6 months later, Ironclad Systems was in a completely different league, no longer the quiet giant in the background, but a powerhouse that dominated the conversation in the infrastructure tech sector. We'd finalized the strategic merger with Praxium Holdings, bringing an valuation north of $1.4 billion. It wasn't about the money, though. It was about the control. The creative freedom, the power to take the technology we developed and make it the gold standard for cities that had been struggling to modernize for decades. I still kept my original office in that same unremarkable building, with its chip paint and one humming vending machine that made the place feel like home. I tried the high-rise thing once, but the glass walls and corner offices just felt like a stage, something that would have made Serena's parents proud but left me cold. That morning, I sat in my office alone, watching the sun break over the skyline like a promise. My team was working out of our new expansion site on the other side of town, a state-of-the-art complex with all the bells and whistles. But I liked the quiet here, the way the walls still held the echoes of our first big wins and our late-night brainstorming sessions. My old work boots were propped under the desk, next to the same metal toolbox I'd carried for years. Some habits die hard. People called me a tech visionary now. Investors wanted my time, my insight, my approval. Every time I walked into a conference room, I saw the recognition in their eyes, the hush that settled over the room before I spoke. I hadn't changed. I still wore the same kind of jeans, still kept a wrench in the trunk of my car, just in case. Because deep down, I was still that guy who'd started this journey by fixing leaky pipes in basements that smelled like mold and old regrets. I'd never be too important to roll up my sleeves and do the work. I'd learned a lot in those 6 months about success, loyalty, and the fragile egos of people who only stand beside you when it suits them. Serena had tried everything. She'd called, texted, emailed. She'd shown up at my office once, all apologies and tears, her voice trembling as she insisted that she hadn't meant to belittle me, that she'd just gotten caught up in her own ambition. She'd said we could be a team again, that my success was her success. But I saw it in her eyes. She wasn't sorry for what she'd done, just sorry that it had all blown up in her face. Sorry that her narrative had fallen apart in front of everyone she cared about. I'd listened. I'd let her speak. And then I told her the same thing I told myself the night I walked out of her parents' dining room. I couldn't be small so she could feel big. She hadn't loved the man I was. She loved the version she'd built for her own story, the one that made her look magnanimous and unstoppable. I didn't hate her for it. I just couldn't go back to being that man. Sometimes I still saw her on social media, glass of wine in hand, captioning her life with carefully chosen words, smiling like the world hadn't shifted under her feet. I wondered if she'd found a new character to fill the role I'd played. I hoped she did, because the truth was, I didn't wish her ill. I just wished her gone from the parts of me she tried to shape. Ironclad's new partnership had opened doors I'd only dreamed of. We were now in 17 cities, with more on the horizon. Our AI systems were revolutionizing water management, cutting costs, preventing disasters, and giving mayors and city planners data they'd never thought possible. Every time we signed a new contract, every time another city manager called to thank me, I felt that same spark I'd felt the first time I'd sketched out the idea on a napkin. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a new deployment plan for Chicago, my CTO, Ravi, knocked lightly and poked his head in. "Hey, boss," he said, his grin wide. "You're gonna want to see this." He handed me his tablet, and there on the screen was a glossy feature in Business Insider, "The Plumber Who Built an Empire." I laughed under my breath. The headline felt like an echo of that night at Serena's parents' house, when I'd stood there while the room went silent. "Look at this," Ravi said, excitement buzzing in his voice. "They're calling you the man who changed the way cities manage water forever." I read the article, nodding. It was flattering, but that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the final quote. Some journalist had dug up one of my old interviews where I'd said, "I'll never stop being a plumber at heart. I'll never stop getting my hands dirty." And I wouldn't, because that was who I was. The guy who fixed things. The guy who saw a problem and refused to look away. Ravi looked at me, his grin fading a little as he caught the expression on my face. "You okay, boss?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "I'm good." And I was. That evening, I packed up my bag and headed out. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with pink and gold. I took the long way home, driving through the neighborhoods where I'd once done small plumbing jobs, the streets that had taught me how to navigate more than just pipes, how to navigate people, how to see past the surface. At a red light, I glanced at my rearview mirror and caught a glimpse of my reflection, a man in his late 30s, a little older, a little wiser, a lot stronger than the guy who'd stood beside Serena while she called him utility class. I didn't need anyone to tell me my worth anymore. I'd written that story myself, and it didn't need anyone else's approval. When I got home, I kicked off my boots and set my toolbox by the door. Some habits, like I said, die hard. I walked into the kitchen, made a simple dinner, and sat down with a beer in my hand. The house was quiet, and for the first time in years, that felt good. Later that night, I took a walk outside. The stars were bright, scattered across the sky like shattered glass. I thought about the road I'd traveled, the moments when I'd felt small, the nights I'd wondered if I was enough. I thought about Serena, about the way she'd tried to mold me into something that fit her narrative, and about the way I'd finally broken free. People called me a tech visionary now, a disruptor, a game changer. But in my bones, I was still the same guy with a wrench in his hand, still the same man who believed in fixing things. I just learned that sometimes the thing that needs fixing most is the way people see you, and the way you see yourself. I smiled to myself as I turned back toward the house. Just a plumber, I thought. The man who built an empire while everyone else was looking the other way. And that was enough. Because I didn't need Serena's approval. I didn't need her father's praise or her mother's polite smile. I had my own success, built with my own hands, on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole. I didn't know what the future would hold. More cities, more contracts, more headlines, maybe. But I knew one thing for certain. I'd face it on my own terms, with my boots on and my head held high. Because that's who I'd always been. Just a plumber. The man who never stopped fixing things.